Marine sniper instructor met single dad at DMV. Then noticed his record on the wall. 2,100 yards. He thought he was just chatting with a quiet father in line. Until his eyes hit that plaque, and he realized the man beside him wasn't just a stranger. He was the legend. He trained, and the reason he still wakes up from nightmares. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the crowded DMV, their harsh glow making the gray morning seem even more dreary. Rain drummed steadily against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to the shuffling papers and quiet conversations filling the waiting area. Luke Garner sat in one of the hard plastic chairs, his long legs stretched out carefully to avoid bumping the seat in front of him. Next to him, Eli hunched over his math workbook, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Need help with that problem, buddy?" Luke asked softly, noticing his son's furrowed brow. The morning had started earlier than usual. They'd arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, hoping to beat the crowd, but it seemed everyone else had the same idea. Eli shook his head, his pencil tapping against the page. "I got it, Dad. Just trying to remember how Mrs. Peterson showed us to do fractions." Luke smiled, reaching over to smooth down a wayward strand of Eli's dark hair. The boy had inherited his mother's serious nature, approaching every task with quiet determination. The thought brought a familiar ache to Luke's chest, but he pushed it aside. There were more pressing matters to worry about, like the transmission trouble in his old Ford pickup and the stack of bills waiting at home. An elderly couple got up from the chairs beside them, and a tall, distinguished-looking man in a weather-beaten leather jacket took one of the vacant seats. Luke noticed the man's ramrod-straight posture and neat gray hair. Military, if he had to guess. The stranger nodded politely as he sat down. "Now serving number A237. The overhead speaker crackled. Luke glanced at his ticket. A 251. Still a while to go. Eli looked up from his homework. "Dad, can I have my granola bar now?" "Sure thing, bud." Luke reached into his worn backpack, fishing out the snack he'd packed. The wrapper crinkled as Eli carefully opened it, breaking off a piece to offer to his father. "No thanks. You enjoy it," Luke said with a gentle smile. His son's thoughtfulness never failed to warm his heart. The gray-haired man beside them cleared his throat. "That's a mighty considerate young man you've got there," he commented, his voice carrying the gravelly warmth of someone used to command. "Thank you, sir," Luke replied, automatically straightening his posture slightly. "This is Eli. I'm Luke Garner." "Ray Matheson," the older man introduced himself, extending his hand. His grip was firm and weathered. "Former Marine Colonel, though these days I mostly just volunteer at the Contude, VA, and try to keep my garden alive." Luke's eyebrows raised slightly at the rank, but he kept his tone casual. "Marines, huh? Small world. I served too, got out about 5 years ago. Did my time in several places I'd rather forget," Ray said with a knowing look, though I suspect that's true for most of us. He glanced at Eli, who was now working on a particularly challenging math problem. "How do you like school, young man?" Eli looked up shyly. "It's okay. I like art class the best. And science." "An artist and a scientist," Ray smiled. "That's a fine combination." The rain continued its steady pattern against the windows as they settled into easy conversation. Ray had a way of drawing people out without being pushy, and Luke found himself relaxing despite the crowded room and growing wait time. "The weather's been something else lately," Ray commented, gesturing to the window. "Reminds me of monsoon season in Southeast Asia, though not quite as humid, thank heaven." Luke nodded. "Yeah, my truck's been having transmission issues, and this weather isn't helping. Been trying to fix it myself at the shop after hours, but parts aren't cheap." "You work as a mechanic?" Ray asked. "At Wilson's Auto, over on Mason Street," Luke confirmed. "It's good work, steady. Lets me be home for Eli in the evenings." Eli had finished his granola bar and was now sketching something in the margins of his workbook. Luke noticed Ray watching the boy with grandfatherly fondness. "Now serving number A, 245, the speaker announced. "Getting closer," Luke murmured, shifting in his seat. His back was starting to protest the hard plastic chair. "Dad, look!" Eli held up his drawing, a detailed sketch of a classic car he'd seen in one of the auto magazines at the shop. "That's really good, buddy," Luke praised, genuine pride in his voice. "You got all the details just right." Ray leaned over slightly to look. "Well, would you look at that? That's talent right there. A '67 Mustang, if I'm not mistaken?" Eli nodded, pleased that someone had recognized the model. '65, actually. He corrected politely. "The grille is different on the '67. Ray chuckled. "Stand corrected. You know your cars, young man." The easy conversation continued as the numbers slowly ticked by. Luke learned that Ray lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, that he taught marksmanship courses occasionally at the local range, and that his prized tomato plants were struggling with the recent weather. In turn, Luke shared about his work at the shop and Eli's upcoming school science fair. "Now serving number A 251, the speaker finally announced. "That's us," Luke said, gathering their things. "It was good meeting you, Colonel." "Likewise," Ray replied warmly. "You take care, both of you." Luke guided Eli toward the counter, where a tired-looking clerk was waiting. As they approached, Ray's eyes drifted to the wall behind the counter, where various local notices and achievements were displayed. His gaze fixed on a simple plaque, partially hidden behind a newer poster about updated ID requirements. The plaque's text was clear enough. Record holder, longest confirmed shot, Sergeant Luke Garner, 2,100 yards. Ray's easy smile froze, his eyes widening in recognition. He watched as Luke stood at the counter, one hand resting protectively on Eli's shoulder. This quiet, humble mechanic, who had spent the last hour making small talk about car repairs and school projects. The same man whose shot had become legendary among Marine snipers, whose name Ray knew from mission reports he'd rather forget. The gentle father helping with homework and the deadly accurate sniper. They were one and the same. Ray sat very still, memories he'd tried to bury surfacing like shadows in clear water. Luke tucked his new license into his wallet, gathering up Eli's scattered school books from the chairs. The boy carefully placed his pencils back into his Superman pencil case, making sure each one lined up perfectly. A habit that reminded Luke so much of himself. "Sergeant Garner?" A deep voice called from behind them. Luke turned to find a tall, gray-haired man approaching with purposeful steps. Despite his age, the stranger carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a Marine, shoulders squared, chin high, every movement precise and measured. "Ray Matheson," the older man said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, weathered fingers strong from years of handling rifles. "You probably don't remember me, son, but I trained your class at Camp Pendleton." Luke's mind flickered back through the years. The names stirred something. Fragments of early morning drills, the sharp crack of rifles, and a commanding voice that demanded excellence, but never cruelty. "Colonel Matheson." Luke straightened slightly. "Old habits dying hard." "Of course, sir. You taught advanced marksmanship." Ray's face creased into a warm smile. "At ease, son. Been a long time since anyone's called me sir. Just Ray these days." His eyes moved to Eli, who had partially hidden himself behind Luke's leg. "And who's this young man?" "This is my son, Eli," Luke said, resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Eli, can you say hello to Mr. Babel Matheson?" "Hello," Eli mumbled, offering a tiny wave before tucking his hand back into his pocket. Ray glanced at the vending machines in the corner. "Got time for a coffee?" "My treat." He pulled some quarters from his pocket. "They even have hot chocolate, if your boy's interested." Luke checked his watch. The auto shop wouldn't open for another hour. Sure, that'd be nice. What do you say, buddy? Hot chocolate? Eli nodded, his shyness melting slightly at the prospect of a treat. They settled into a corner of the waiting area, away from the main crowd. The vending machine coffee wasn't great, but it was hot, and something about sharing it made it taste better. Eli cupped his hot chocolate carefully, blowing on it just like his dad did with his coffee. So, Ray began. Auto mechanic now? Good, honest work. Luke nodded. Johnson's Auto and Tire over on Mason Street. Nothing fancy, but it keeps us going. He glanced at Eli, who was contentedly drawing shapes in his notebook. Regular hours, steady work. It's what we needed. Ray's eyes softened with understanding. Coming home, really coming home. It's not always easy, is it? No, sir, Ray. Luke corrected himself. It's not. He paused, choosing his words carefully with Eli nearby. Some days are better than others. Having this little guy helps, though. Gives me a reason to keep moving forward. Ray watched as Luke unconsciously adjusted Eli's collar, smoothing it with gentle fingers. You're doing good work here too, son. Different kind of service, but just as important. The conversation flowed easier than Luke expected. They talked about mutual acquaintances from Pendleton, about the changes in training protocols, about the way the Corps evolved. Ray shared stories about his own transition to civilian life, the odd jobs he'd worked before finding his place in the local veterans community. Still miss it sometimes? Ray asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Luke stared into his coffee cup. Parts of it, the brotherhood, the sense of purpose. He glanced at Eli again, making sure he was absorbed in his drawing. But other parts, well, some things are better left behind. Ray nodded, understanding flowing between them. You know, I remember when you first came through my class. Could tell right away you had something special. That focus, that stillness. Can't teach that. Luke shifted uncomfortably in his chair, memories threatening to surface. That was a lifetime ago. Dad? Eli's voice broke through the moment. Can I get another hot chocolate? Sure, buddy. Luke reached for his wallet, but Ray was already standing. This round's on me too, Ray insisted, pulling out more quarters. Least I can do for one of my best students. As Ray walked Eli to the vending machine, Luke watched them together. The old instructor was pointing at something on the machine, making Eli laugh, a rare sound in public. The boy's shoulders had relaxed, his usual wariness around strangers softening in Ray's grandfatherly presence. When they returned, Eli clutched his second cup of hot chocolate, a small smile playing on his face. Mr. Matheson knows about dinosaurs, Dad. He says there's a museum nearby that has real bones. Is that right? Luke raised an eyebrow at Ray, who shrugged modestly. Natural History Museum over in Winston-Salem, Ray explained. Used to take my students there sometimes. Amazing what you can learn about patience and observation from studying the past. The rain had started to let up outside, thin streams of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Luke checked his watch again. We should probably head out. Gotta open up the shop soon. They all stood, Ray helping Eli gather his remaining school supplies. It was good seeing you, Luke. Really good. He pulled out a business card, slightly worn at the edges. I'm involved with the veterans group at First Baptist now. We meet Tuesday evenings. You and Eli would be welcome anytime. Luke took the card, turning it over in his hands. Thanks. We'll think about it. He guided Eli toward the door, then turned back. It was good seeing you too, Colonel Ray. As father and son pushed through the heavy glass doors into the clearing morning, Ray stood watching them go. Eli skipped ahead, splashing in a puddle while Luke called out a gentle warning about wet shoes. The boy's laughter carried back through the glass, bright and clear as a bell. Ray's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. pride in the man Luke had become, in the father he was now. But beneath that pride lay something darker, heavier, a knowledge of things left unsaid, of a connection to Luke's past that went deeper than shared, memories of Camp Pendleton. He watched until they disappeared around the corner, the boy's hand trustingly in his father's, both of them leaning slightly into the morning wind. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Carter's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Luke wiped his hands on a red shop rag, trying to focus on the transmission he was supposed to be fixing. But his mind kept drifting back to yesterday's chance encounter at the DMV. Earth to Luke. Mike, his coworker, waved a wrench in front of his face. "That's the third time you've cleaned the same bolt. What's eating you, man?" Luke blinked, looking down at the spotless bolt in his hand. "Just thinking." "Yeah, I can see that." Mike leaned against the workbench, his coveralls stained with oil. "You've been somewhere else all morning. Everything okay with Eli?" "Eli's fine." Luke glanced over at the corner of the shop where his son sat cross-legged on an old office chair hunched over, his sketchbook. "I ran into someone yesterday. My old Marine instructor from sniper school." "No kidding?" Mike's eyebrows shot up. "What's he doing around here?" "Lives here, apparently." Luke shrugged, picking up another part to clean. "Colonel Ray Matheson. Tough as nails back then, but fair. Strange seeing him after all these years." In his corner, Eli's pencil moved steadily across the paper. Luke could see the familiar shapes taking form, the angular lines of tanks, the gentle curves of a setting sun. His son's drawings always seemed to circle back to military themes, subtle reminders of the life Luke had left behind. "Dad?" Eli called out. "Is this right?" He held up his latest drawing, a detailed sketch of a Marine in full gear standing against a desert backdrop. Luke walked over, his boots echoing on the concrete. "That's really good, buddy." He ruffled Eli's hair, noting how his son had carefully included every detail of the uniform patches. "The proportions are perfect." The morning passed in a blur of oil changes and brake jobs. Around 2 o'clock, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway of the shop. Luke looked up from under the hood of a Chevy to see Colonel Matheson standing there, looking slightly out of place in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt. "Having car trouble, Colonel?" Luke called out, wiping his hands clean. Ray smiled, a hint of embarrassment crossing his weathered face. "Thought the timing belt might need checking." He patted the hood of his well-maintained Ford, "Though I suppose I could have called first." Luke couldn't help but laugh. The car was pristine, probably better maintained than half the vehicles in the shop. "Sure, let's take a look." He winked at Eli, who was watching the exchange with interest. "Though I have a feeling this might be the healthiest engine I'll see all day." As Luke went through the motions of checking the car, they fell into easy conversation. Ray asked about Luke's transition to civilian life, genuinely interested in how he'd ended up in auto repair. "Always liked working with my hands," Luke explained, checking the belt tension. "After the Corps, well, engines made more sense than people for a while. They're honest. Something's either broken or it's not." Ray nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some things are harder to fix than engines." "Here." A small voice interrupted them. Eli stood there, holding out a juice box to Ray, his eyes shy but determined. Ray's face softened as he accepted the apple juice. "Thank you, son." He looked at the straw for a moment, then carefully punctured the top, taking a sip. "Perfect timing. I was getting thirsty." Luke watched the interaction, something warming in his chest. Eli rarely offered anything to strangers, preferring to stay in his own quiet world of drawings and observations. "Listen," Ray said, rolling the juice box between his palms. "There's this diner downtown, Mary's Place. They make a decent cup of coffee. I was thinking, if you're free Saturday morning." Luke hesitated, his hand pausing on the wrench. Social interactions weren't his strong suit these days, and weekends were usually reserved for Eli's activities. They have chocolate chip pancakes, Ray added, glancing at Eli. Best in the county, or so I hear. A small smile spread across Eli's face. The first real one Luke had seen all week. It was like watching the sun break through clouds. Luke looked at his son's hopeful expression, then back at Ray. What time Saturday? How about 9? Ray suggested, finishing the last of his juice. 9 works, Luke agreed, closing the hood of Ray's car. And Colonel, your timing belt's fine. Probably good for another 50,000 miles. Ray chuckled, pulling out his wallet. Worth every penny to know that. He handed Luke a business card. See you Saturday then? Saturday, Luke confirmed, tucking the card into his pocket. As Ray's car pulled away from the shop, Luke felt Eli's small hand slip into his. Can I bring my sketchbook? His son asked quietly. Of course, buddy. Luke squeezed his hand. Of course you can. The bell above the door of May's Country Diner chimed softly as Luke and Eli stepped inside from the chilly morning air. The familiar scent of sizzling bacon and fresh-baked biscuits wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Saturday regulars filled most of the red vinyl booths, their murmured conversations mixing with the clink of coffee cups and silverware. Ray Matheson was already there, seated in a corner booth next to a window streaked with morning condensation. His weathered face brightened when he spotted them, and he stood up, offering a firm handshake to Luke and a gentler one to Eli. Glad you boys could make it, Ray said, his voice carrying that familiar military clip despite his casual plaid shirt and khakis. Luke adjusted his faded Marine cap and slid into the booth, Eli tucking in close beside him. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the laminated menu with its colorful pictures of pancakes and waffles. Order whatever you'd like, son, Ray said to Eli, who ducked his head shyly but couldn't hide his smile. Their waitress, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Betty, appeared with 3 glasses of water. What can I get for you, fellas? Hot chocolate, please, Eli said softly, earning an approving nod from his father. Coffee, black, both men said in unison, then shared a knowing look that made Eli giggle. As they waited for their drinks, Ray noticed how Luke's shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, despite his calm exterior. The younger man's eyes occasionally drifted to the window, watching cars pass by on Main Street as if looking for something far beyond the small town's limits. Their breakfast arrived, plates of eggs, hash browns, and those famous maize biscuits. Eli carefully blew on his hot chocolate, leaving a little mustache of whipped cream that Luke gently wiped away with a napkin. The conversation started light, about the auto shop, about Eli's school, about Ray's retirement. But as their plates emptied and they settled into their second cups of coffee, something in the comfortable silence seemed to shift. Luke absently traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger. Colonel? He began, then corrected himself. Ray, can I ask you something? Of course, son. How did you, after all your years of service, how did you make peace with the hard calls? Ray set down his coffee cup slowly, feeling the weight of unspoken words in Luke's question. Sometimes we don't, he answered honestly. Sometimes we just learn to live with them. Eli had become absorbed in drawing on his paper placemat with crayons Betty had brought him, creating a world of his own while the adults talked. Luke's voice dropped lower, meant only for Ray's ears. There was this mission, about 4 years ago, my last one. He paused, swallowing hard. We were in a village outside Kandahar. Intelligence said there was a high-value target in the area. Ray felt his heart begin to pound, but kept his face neutral, nodding for Luke to continue. I was set up on Overwatch, about 2,100 yards out. The target appeared, just like they said he would. But then, Luke's hands tightened around his coffee cup. A child ran into the street. Everything happened so fast. The crossfire. He stopped, taking a deep breath. She couldn't have been much older than Eli. Ray's throat went dry. He knew this story. He had read the after-action report dozens of times, had signed off on the operation himself. He had carried the weight of that decision every day since, never knowing he would one day be sitting across from the sniper who had been on that rooftop. "I couldn't stay in after that," Luke continued quietly. "Couldn't trust myself behind a scope anymore. Some nights I still wake up thinking about her face. Ray wanted to speak, to confess, to share the burden of guilt he'd carried. But looking at Luke's raw pain, at Eli's innocent concentration on his drawing, the words stuck in his throat. "I've never told anyone that before," Luke admitted, adjusting his cap again. "Not even the VA counselor." "Thank you for trusting me with it," Ray managed to say, his voice rougher than usual. Eli looked up from his drawing then, sensing the heaviness in the air. He pushed his artwork across the table to Ray, a careful crayon rendering of 3 stick figures. A tall one, a medium one, and a small one, all holding hands. "That's you, and Dad, and me," he explained softly. Ray stared at the simple drawing, feeling the weight of both grace and guilt pressing down on his chest. The trust in both their faces, Luke's and Eli's, felt like a gift he didn't deserve. Luke checked his watch and started gathering their things. "We should get going. I promised this little artist we'd stop by the hardware store to pick up supplies for his science project." They stood, Ray insisting on paying the bill despite Luke's protests. Outside the diner, the morning had warmed slightly, the sun breaking through the clouds. "Thank you for listening," Luke said, extending his hand. "You're easier to talk to than most people, sir." Ray shook his hand, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He watched as father and son walked down the sidewalk, Eli's hand tucked safely in Luke's, the morning sun casting their long shadows behind them. Only when they were out of sight did Ray let his smile fall. He leaned against the diner's brick wall, feeling suddenly old and tired. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered to the empty air, words that came 4 years too late. The diner's bell chimed again as another customer entered, and somewhere down the street, a car horn honked. The ordinary sounds of a small-town Saturday morning continued, unaware of the weight of secrets and memories that hung in the space between veterans. The morning sun filtered through stained-glass windows, casting patches of colored light across the worn wooden pews of First Baptist Church. Luke sat in the back row with Eli, their familiar spot every Sunday for the past 3 years. The old hymnal felt heavy in Luke's calloused hands as the congregation swayed gently to the piano's melody. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The familiar words filled the small sanctuary. Luke's deep voice was barely above a whisper, but Eli sang out clear and strong beside him. Luke glanced down at his son, heart swelling at the boy's earnest expression. Eli knew every word by heart, just like Luke had at his age. The morning light caught the dust motes swirling in the air, and Luke found his thoughts drifting as the music washed over him. His eyes closed, and his prayer was simple but desperate. "Lord, please, just give me peace." The weight of his past felt especially heavy in these quiet moments, when there was nothing to distract him from his memories. Mrs. Henderson's piano playing swelled into the final verse, and Eli pressed closer to Luke's side, small hand finding his father's larger one. Luke squeezed it gently, grateful for the anchor his son provided in these moments. After the final hymn, Pastor Whitmore's sermon passed in a familiar rhythm of scripture and gentle wisdom. Luke found himself actually listening today, instead of just going through the motions. The message was about second chances and divine timing, how God could use even our mistakes to guide us toward healing. When the service ended, the congregation filtered out into the crisp autumn morning. The churchyard was alive with the usual post-service mingling, elderly ladies discussing lunch plans, children chasing each other around headstones, deacons talking about the upcoming fall festival. Luke helped Eli with his jacket when he spotted a familiar figure near the church steps. Ray Matheson stood talking with Pastor Whitmore, both men laughing at something. Ray had just said, "The colonel looked different here, more relaxed in his Sunday suit than he had at the diner yesterday." as if the church ground softened his military bearing somewhat. "Dad, look, it's Charlie." Eli tugged at Luke's sleeve, pointing to Pastor Whitmore's old golden retriever lounging in a patch of sun near the church door. Before Luke could respond, Eli was already trotting over to the dog, his dress shoes clicking on the concrete path. Luke followed more slowly, noting how naturally Ray and the pastor spoke to each other. As he approached, he caught fragments of their conversation about an upcoming veterans meeting. Pastor Whitmore's warm smile welcomed him. "He's been helping coordinate our veterans ministry for years now." "Didn't know you attended First Baptist, son," Ray said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but friendly. "Every Sunday," Luke replied, watching Eli scratch Charlie's ears, "though we usually slip out pretty quick after service." "Well, maybe you'd consider staying a bit longer sometime," Ray suggested. "We have a veterans group that meets Wednesday nights. Nothing formal, just coffee, conversation, fellowship. Some of these boys have been where you've been." Luke shifted uncomfortably. But before he could form a polite refusal, Eli called out, "Colonel Ray!" "My shoe's untied," Ray chuckled, already moving toward the boy. "Well, we can't have that, can we, soldier?" He knelt down beside Eli, his movements careful but sure as he helped the boy with his laces. "Here's a trick I learned in the Corps. Double knot. See? That'll keep 'em secure." Luke watched the scene unfold, something catching in his throat. Ray's patience, the gentle way he showed Eli the proper technique, the proud smile on his son's face when he got it right. It stirred memories of his own father, gone too soon to teach him such things. Pastor Whitmore stepped closer to Luke, speaking quietly. "Ray's been a blessing to our congregation, especially with the veterans ministry. Sometimes the best healing comes from those who truly understand our struggles." Luke nodded, unable to find the right words. He watched as Ray straightened up, ruffling Eli's hair with grandfatherly affection. "Think about Wednesday nights," Ray said, turning back to Luke. "No pressure. We're just here if you need us." The autumn breeze rustled through the churchyard's old oak trees as they prepared to leave. Eli had moved on to helping Pastor Whitmore feed Charlie treats from the pastor's pocket while Luke and Ray discussed the meeting details. As Luke called Eli to head home, Pastor Whitmore caught Ray's arm. The older men stood watching father and son walk toward their truck, Eli chattering excitedly about Charlie and his new shoe-tying technique. "You two were meant to find each other again," Pastor Whitmore said softly. Ray looked up at the cloudy sky, his expression complex, a mixture of hope and hidden burden. The weather looked like it might rain, but somehow the clouds didn't seem as dark as they had earlier that morning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Luke's front yard as Ray's weathered pickup truck pulled into the gravel driveway. The modest single-story house needed a fresh coat of paint, but the small flower bed beneath the front window, bright with marigolds and petunias, spoke of careful attention. Ray sat in his truck for a moment, a veteran's barbecue flyer resting on the passenger seat beside him. Luke appeared on the front porch, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Colonel, this is a surprise." His voice carried warmth despite his raised eyebrow. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," Ray said, climbing out of his truck with the flyer in hand. "Thought I'd drop this by. Church is hosting a veterans barbecue next weekend." "Come on in," Luke gestured toward the door. "We just finished washing dishes." Inside, the living room welcomed Ray, with its modest comfort. A well-worn couch bore the indentation of countless father-son movie nights, while a coffee table displayed scattered colored pencils and Eli's latest drawings. Family photos lined the walls. Luke in his dress blues, Eli's school pictures, and an old snapshot of a woman with Eli's gentle eyes who must have been his mother. "Mr. Ray." Eli's excited voice carried from the hallway as he ran to greet their visitor. He wore pajama pants decorated with dinosaurs despite the early hour. and his socks didn't match. "Hey there, young man," Ray smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. That's when he noticed it, mounted on the wall above the television, a carefully maintained M40A5 sniper rifle. The weapon was spotlessly clean, its woodstock polished to a soft sheen, but Ray could tell from the dust on the mounting brackets that it hadn't been handled in years. Eli followed Ray's gaze. "That's Daddy's special gun," he said matter-of-factly. "He doesn't shoot anymore, though." Luke shifted uncomfortably, but before he could speak, Ray touched the wooden stock gently. "Sometimes it's not about hitting a target," he said softly. "Sometimes it's about steadying your hands again." A moment of understanding passed between the two men. Luke cleared his throat. "You eaten dinner yet, Colonel? We've got plenty of leftover lasagna." "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. Please stay, Mr. Ray." Eli bounced on his toes. "Daddy made garlic bread too." Ray found himself seated at their small kitchen table, watching Luke reheat generous portions of lasagna, while Eli chattered about his day at school. The kitchen was humble but homey. Dishes drying in the rack, crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, a window box full of fresh herbs. "So there I was," Luke was saying as he served the food, trying to explain to Mrs. Henderson why her check engine light keeps coming on, and she swears up and down it must be because Mercury is in retrograde. Ray laughed, and to his surprise, Luke joined in. A full, uninhibited laugh that lit up his whole face. It was the first time Ray had heard such genuine mirth from the younger man. And then, Luke continued, wiping tears from his eyes, "She pulls out this crystal necklace and tries to wave it over the hood of her car." Eli giggled, sauce on his chin. "Did the crystal fix it, Daddy?" "Not quite, buddy. Turned out she just needed an oil change." The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from funny stories at the auto shop to Eli's upcoming school science fair. Ray found himself relaxing into the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with people who felt increasingly like family. As the evening wound down, Eli insisted on showing Ray his collection of model airplanes before bedtime. The boy's room was a testament to his fascination with all things military. Posters of aircraft carriers shared wall space with his own drawings of tanks and helicopters. "You've got quite the artist here." One. 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 Ray told Luke as they walked back to the living room. "Takes after his mother," Luke said softly. "She was always drawing something." The mention of Eli's mother hung in the air for a moment before Luke added, "Thank you for staying for dinner, sir. It's been good having someone else at the table." Ray glanced again at the mounted rifle, remembering the young Marine who'd once wielded it with such precision and purpose. Now here was that same Marine, building a different kind of life, with careful, steady hands, fixing cars, making lasagna, raising a son. The twilight was deepening as Ray made his way to his truck. The house behind him glowed warmly, squares of yellow light spilling onto the lawn. He could see Luke and Eli waving from the front window. Settling into the driver's seat, Ray felt the weight of unspoken truths press against his chest. "Maybe I can finally make peace," he whispered to himself as he started the engine. The bond between them was growing stronger with each passing day. But so was the burden of his hidden guilt. The late morning sun warmed the churchyard as country music drifted from portable speakers. The smell of grilling burgers and hot dogs filled the air, mixing with the sweet scent of freshly cut grass. Luke stood at the large grill, spatula in hand, wearing a faded USMC t-shirt that had seen better days. His movements were practiced and steady as he flipped burgers with the same focus he once gave to maintaining his rifle. Eli darted across the lawn, giggling as he played tag with 3 other kids. His sneakers kicked up bits of grass, and his usually shy demeanor had melted away in the summer heat and excitement. Luke couldn't help but smile every time his son's laughter carried across the yard. Ray's pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot, and the old Marine stepped out carefully, balancing a covered pie dish in his weathered hands. He wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt, a change from his usual casual attire. The pie steam escaped from beneath the aluminum foil, carrying the unmistakable scent of fresh apples and cinnamon. "Thought we could use something sweet," Ray called out as he approached the grill. "My wife's old recipe. Been years since I tried making it, but some things you don't forget." Luke nodded appreciatively. "Smells amazing, sir." You can set it with the other desserts under the pavilion. Other veterans began arriving in small groups, some with families, others alone. Many wore hats or shirts, declaring their service branches. A retired Army sergeant with a pronounced limp made his way to the grill first. "So this is the famous Marine sniper everyone's talking about," he said, extending his hand to Luke. "Jim Cooper, 82nd Airborne. Ray here's been telling us about your record shot." Luke shook his hand firmly but modestly ducked his head. "Just did what I was trained to do, sir." Ray moved through the growing crowd, speaking quietly to small groups. 2,100 yards, Luke overheard him saying. Perfect conditions, perfect shot. Saved his whole unit that day. Each time Ray shared the story, his voice carried a mix of pride and something deeper, almost like reverence. More veterans approached Luke at the grill. A former Navy corpsman helped him arrange burgers on a platter. 2 Air Force veterans insisted on taking over cooking duties so Luke could join the real party. Their easy acceptance and casual banter felt like a balm on old wounds. "Dad!" Eli called out, running up with red cheeks and bright eyes. "Can I have a hot dog?" "And Tommy says his dad was in the Marines too." "Sure thing, buddy." Luke ruffled his son's hair. "Just make sure you drink some water, too. It's getting warm out here." The afternoon unfolded in waves of conversation and laughter. Veterans gathered at picnic tables, sharing stories that ranged from hilarious to heartfelt. Luke found himself drawn into their circles, surprised by how natural it felt to be among others who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. "No way that shot was luck," a retired Force Recon Marine insisted, gesturing with his paper plate. "That kind of accuracy takes more than just good training." "The wind that day," Luke found himself explaining, hands unconsciously moving as if holding his rifle. "It was tricky. Had to factor in the elevation, too." Ray watched from nearby, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd achieved what he'd hoped, getting Luke to open up, to remember the pride of service without the shadow of later events. As the sun began its westward slide, families started packing up chairs and coolers. Kids made one last dash around the playground equipment. Luke gathered empty plates and cups, working his way across the churchyard. Near the pavilion, he caught Ray watching him. The older Marine's eyes held the kind of warm regard Luke remembered from his own father, before cancer took him too early. It was a look that spoke of pride, of connection, of understanding. Something shifted in Luke's chest, a loosening of a knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. The afternoon's simple pleasures, grilling burgers, watching Eli play, sharing stories with others who'd walked similar paths, had awakened something he thought was lost forever. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. The digital clock on Luke's nightstand blinked 2:17 a.m. in harsh red numbers. His sheets were tangled around his legs, damp with sweat. The desert haunted his dreams again, sand stretching endlessly under a burning sun, the weight of his rifle against his shoulder, and the impossible choice he had to make. In his nightmare, the scene played out just as it had years ago. The target moved through the marketplace, blending with civilians. Luke's finger trembled on the trigger as his commanding officer's voice crackled through the radio. "Take the shot." Then came the sound that would echo in his burious clo. Mined forever. Not the crack of his rifle, but the scream that followed. Luke sat bolt upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bedroom was dark, except for the silver moonlight filtering through thin curtains. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push away the images. But they clung to him like shadows. "Daddy?" Eli's small voice came from the doorway. The boy stood there in his Superman pajamas, clutching his stuffed tiger. His eyes were wide with worry in the dim light. "Hey, buddy," Luke said softly, forcing steadiness into his voice. "What are you doing up? I heard you making sounds." Eli padded across the carpet and climbed onto the bed. "Were you having a bad dream?" Luke pulled his son close, feeling the warmth of the small body against his side. Eli's presence anchored him to the present, away from the desert and its ghosts. "Yeah, just a silly dream. Nothing to worry about." "Was it about when you were a soldier?" Eli's voice was barely a whisper. Luke's throat tightened. Sometimes his son's perception startled him. "Something like that. But it's okay now. You should get back to bed." "Can I stay here for a little bit?" "Sure, buddy." Luke held him until Eli's breathing grew steady and slow. Carefully, he carried his sleeping son back to his own room, tucking him in beneath the covers decorated with spaceships and stars. Unable to face his own bed again, Luke made his way to the front porch. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the lingering scent of summer grass and distant rain. He sank into the old wooden rocking chair, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. Above him, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Luke remembered nights in Afghanistan when he'd looked up at those same stars, finding comfort in their constant presence. Now they felt like distant witnesses to everything he'd done and failed to do. The quiet was broken by the soft rumble of an engine. Headlights swept across the front yard as a familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Ray stepped out, carrying a plastic container. "Couldn't sleep either?" Ray called softly, climbing the porch steps. Luke managed a tired smile. "Rough night. Brought you some leftovers from the barbecue," Ray said, setting the container on the small table between them. "Sarah's potato salad. Too good to waste." Without asking, Ray settled into the second rocking chair. They sat in comfortable silence, two men who understood that sometimes words weren't necessary. The sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly in the east, the stars fading one by one. "Coffee," Luke offered after a while. "Wouldn't say no." Luke went inside and returned with 2 steaming mugs. The coffee was strong and black, the way they both preferred it. Ray wrapped his weathered hands around the warm ceramic, his eyes distant. "You know," Ray said finally, "nights like these, they get to all of us. No shame in that." Luke nodded, grateful for the understanding in the older man's voice. "It's not just the dreams. It's everything that comes with them. The memories, the questions, the choices we had to make," Ray added quietly. "Yeah," Luke's voice grew hoarse. "Especially the ones we can't take back." The first hints of dawn touched the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Birds began their morning songs in the trees, oblivious to the weight of memory hanging between the two men. "I used to think time would make it easier," Luke continued. "That one day I'd wake up and it wouldn't be the first thing I think about. But it's always there, just waiting. And now, with Eli." He trailed off, unable to finish. Ray turned to look at him, his face etched with understanding, and something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. He reached out and placed a firm hand on Luke's shoulder, the gesture carrying the weight of years of shared experience. "You're not the only one who has to carry it," Ray said, quietly. Luke met the older man's gaze, sensing layers of meaning in those words that he couldn't quite grasp. But before he could ask, the moment passed, leaving only the sound of awakening birds and the creaking of rocking chairs on worn wooden boards. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot of Pete's shooting range. Luke sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, while Eli bounced excitedly in the passenger seat. Ray's pickup was already there, parked near the entrance. "Come on, Dad!" Eli tugged at Luke's sleeve. "Colonel Ray is waiting." Luke took a deep breath, his chest tight. He hadn't touched a trigger since coming home. The thought made his palms sweat. "Hold on, buddy. Let's just take a minute." Ray emerged from the range office, carrying 3 sets of protective earmuffs. His weathered face broke into a warm smile as he approached their truck. Luke forced himself to open the door. "Wasn't sure you'd make it," Ray said, handing them each a pair of ear protection. "Almost called to check." "Neither was I," Luke admitted quietly. He helped Eli adjust his earmuffs, grateful for the distraction. The indoor range was cool and dimly lit, smelling of gun oil and concrete. Their footsteps echoed as they walked to the far end, away from the handful of other shooters. Eli stayed close to Luke's side, eyes wide with curiosity. Ray had already set up a station with a .22 rifle. "Perfect for beginners. Thought we'd start small," he said, patting the stock. "Nothing fancy." Luke ran his fingers along the smooth barrel, memories flooding back. His first shot at Camp Pendleton. The weight of responsibility. The pride of accuracy. His hand trembled slightly. "Dad?" Eli's voice was soft. "Are you okay?" Luke knelt beside his son, meeting his worried eyes. "Yeah, buddy. Just remembering some things." He managed to smile. "Want to learn how this works?" Eli nodded eagerly. Luke positioned him carefully at the bench, showing him how to brace the rifle properly. "First rule is safety," he explained, falling naturally into teaching mode. "Always treat every gun like it's loaded." Ray stood back, arms crossed, watching with quiet approval as Luke guided Eli through the basics. "Remember what I taught you about breathing?" he asked. "In through the nose, out through the mouth," Luke recited, demonstrating for Eli. "Squeeze the trigger between breaths." Nice and easy. Eli mimicked his father's breathing pattern, his small face serious with concentration. "Like this? Perfect." Luke adjusted Eli's grip slightly. "Now, see that target? Focus on the center. Let everything else fade away." The paper target hung 40 feet downrange, a simple bullseye pattern. Eli squinted through the sights, his tongue poking out slightly as he aimed. "Take your time," Ray encouraged. "No rush." The crack of the shot made Eli jump, even through the ear protection. Luke steadied him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Look," he said, pointing downrange. The bullet had struck the outer ring of the target. "I hit it!" Eli's face lit up with pure joy. "Dad, I hit it!" "Sure did, buddy." Luke felt a surge of pride, unexpected and warm. "Want to try again?" They spent the next hour working on Eli's form and accuracy. With each shot, his confidence grew. Luke found himself relaxing, caught up in his son's enthusiasm. He demonstrated proper stance, trigger discipline, and sight alignment, lessons learned long ago from the man who now watched them both with knowing eyes. Ray occasionally offered quiet suggestions, but mostly he let Luke teach. The bond between father and son was visible in every careful instruction, every proud smile, every moment of shared concentration. After Eli's final round, 3 shots grouped surprisingly well near the center, Ray cleared his throat. "You're a natural teacher, Luke. Just like someone else I know." Luke helped Eli clean and store the rifle, showing him the importance of proper maintenance. His hands moved through the familiar motions without hesitation now. Muscle memory replacing anxiety. "Can we come back sometime?" Eli asked as they packed up their gear. "Please?" Luke glanced at Ray, who raised an eyebrow in question. "Maybe," Luke said. "We'll see." The setting sun painted the sky orange as they emerged from the range. Eli clutched his target paper proudly, already planning where to hang it in his room. Ray walked them to their truck. "Thanks for today," Luke said quietly while Eli climbed in. "I wasn't sure I could." "You did more than you think," Ray interrupted gently. "You're a good father, Luke. Better than most I've known." Luke felt warmth spread through his chest at the unexpected praise. "Thank you, sir." He started the engine, grateful for the growing smile on his face as they pulled away. Ray stood in the parking lot, watching until their taillights disappeared around the bend. The truth he carried weighed heavily in his heart, but for now, He let himself focus on the healing he'd witnessed today. A father and son finding common ground, and perhaps a path toward peace. The crisp autumn breeze rustled through the churchyard, sending fallen leaves dancing across the grass. Luke stood on a stepladder, helping Eli hang a string of red, white, and blue bunting along the church's front porch. The afternoon sun caught the metallic threads in the fabric, making them sparkle like tiny stars. "Hold it steady, buddy," Luke said, reaching down to adjust the banner. Eli's small hands gripped the fabric carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Like this, Dad?" "Perfect." Luke smiled, remembering how just a few weeks ago he would have declined to help with any military-related events. But something had shifted. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter somehow. Across the churchyard, Ray directed a group of volunteers, setting up folding chairs in neat rows. His commanding presence hadn't changed since his Marine days, but there was a gentleness to it now. He caught Luke's eye and gave a quick salute, with a clipboard in his hand. "Mr. Ray sure knows how to run things," Eli observed, carefully placing star stickers on paper flags they'd made for the ceremony. Luke chuckled. "That he does, son. That's why he was such a good instructor." Inside the church basement, tables were covered with craft supplies. Children from the Sunday school class had spent the morning making patriotic decorations. Eli's artwork stood out among them, carefully drawn American flags with "Thank you, Veterans" written in his best handwriting. Pastor Whitmore emerged from his office, carrying a box of programs for the upcoming ceremony. "Luke, would you mind helping me with these?" "Of course, Pastor." Luke climbed down from the ladder, ruffling Eli's hair as he passed. "Keep working on those flags, buddy. They look great." In the pastor's office, the afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the worn wooden desk. Luke helped sort the programs into neat stacks, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the room. "It's good to see you so involved," Pastor Whitmore said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ray mentioned you've been instrumental in planning this ceremony." Luke shrugged modestly. "Just doing my part. Besides, Eli loves helping out. Ray's been a blessing to this community." The pastor continued, carefully arranging programs, "Especially to our veterans. He has a way of reaching people who've lost their way." Luke nodded, thinking about the past few weeks. "He does. I wasn't sure about coming back to church regularly, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Ray made it easier somehow. Made me feel like I belonged again." Outside, they could hear Ray's voice carrying across the yard, giving instructions about chair placement and sound system setup. The pastor smiled, watching through the window. "You know, Luke, I've noticed a change in you since Ray came into your life. You seem more at peace." Luke leaned against the desk, considering this. "I guess I am. It's like he understands, without me having to explain everything, and Eli adores him. He's become quite the grandfather figure," Pastor Whitmore observed. "Yeah," Luke smiled, remembering how Ray had taught Eli to tie his shoes properly last week, showing the same patience he'd once used to teach Marines. "I never thought I'd trust anyone with Eli like that. But Ray, he's different." The pastor settled into his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You've opened up more in the past month than in the 2 years I've known you, Luke. That's what faith in people can do. It helps us heal. I was angry for so long," Luke admitted quietly. "At myself, at God, at everything. But being around Ray, seeing how he serves others despite whatever he's been through, it's helped me remember who I used to be. Who I still am, maybe." Through the window, they could see Eli showing Ray his decorated flags, beaming with pride as the older man examined each one carefully. Ray's face lit up with genuine joy, making Eli glow with happiness. "You know what Ray's planning for the ceremony?" the pastor asked, a knowing look in his eyes. Luke shook his head. "He's been pretty secretive about some parts of it. Says it's a surprise. He wants to honor you properly, Pastor Whitmore said softly. He believes your story needs to be told. Luke shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure I deserve that kind of recognition. That's exactly why you do. The pastor leaned forward in his chair. Luke, sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. But forgiveness doesn't always come in the form you expect. Luke nodded, not fully understanding the deeper meaning behind those words, but feeling their truth. Nonetheless, he watched through the window as Ray helped Eli hang more flags, their laughter carrying across the churchyard. I just want be worthy of this second chance, Luke said quietly, of Ray's friendship, of this community's acceptance. You already are, Pastor Whitmore assured him, rising to stack the sorted programs. You always were. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, organizing the remaining materials for the ceremony. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the churchyard where Ray and Eli continued their decorating. 2 generations bound by love and simple acts of service. The November morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect for the Veterans Day ceremony. American flags lined the churchyard path, their colors bright against the autumn sky. The gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh coffee and pastries from the fellowship hall. Luke stood in front of his bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting his Marine uniform jacket. The metals clinked softly as his fingers brushed over them. He hadn't worn it in years, but today felt different. The fabric still fit, though. It felt heavier now, weighted with memories. Dad, Eli called from downstairs. Are you ready? Colonel Ray said we can't be late. Luke smiled, watching his son's reflection appear in the mirror. Eli wore his Sunday best, his dark hair carefully combed. Looking sharp, buddy, Luke said, ruffling Eli's hair. Got your drawing pad? Yep. Eli held up his notebook. I'm gonna draw everything today, even you giving your speech. The drive to church was quiet, both lost in thought. Luke's hands gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter than usual. He'd avoided ceremonies like this for years, but Ray had insisted. Time to let people thank you properly, he'd said. The church parking lot was already full when they arrived. Folding chairs filled the lawn, facing a small stage draped with red, white, and blue bunting. Veterans in various uniforms mingled with families, their conversations creating a gentle hum in the morning air. Luke, over here! Ray waved from near the stage. He wore his full dress uniform, medals glinting in the sunlight. His smile was warm as he clasped Luke's hand. Proud to have you here, son. Eli found his seat in the front row, right next to the pastor's wife who had saved spots for them. He pulled out his drawing pad, already sketching the flags and the gathering crowd. The ceremony began with the Pledge of Allegiance, voices rising together in the morning air. Ray took the podium, his presence commanding attention. His voice carried across the churchyard, strong and clear. Today, we honor not just the uniform, but the heart beneath it, Ray began. We celebrate not just victories, but the courage to face our deepest battles. His eyes found Luke in the crowd. Some heroes among us carried their burden quietly, asking nothing in return. Luke felt his throat tighten as Ray continued, speaking about sacrifice, duty, and the bonds formed in service. The words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, acknowledging things he'd never been able to express himself. Today, I want to recognize someone special, Ray said, his voice softening. A Marine who exemplifies everything we stand for. Luke Garner, would you please join me? Luke's feet felt heavy as he walked to the stage. The applause surrounded him, but it was Eli's beaming face he focused on, the boy's pencil flying across his paper to capture the moment. Luke here holds the record for the longest confirmed shot in his class, 2,100 yards, Ray announced. But more than that, he shows us daily what it means to serve with honor, to be a father, and to rebuild a life of purpose. The words hit Luke's heart like warm rain, after a drought. He gripped Ray's hand, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was steady. "Thank you, sir, for everything." The ceremony concluded with amazing grace, played on bagpipes, the notes floating over the crowd like a blessing. People began to mingle, sharing coffee and stories. Luke found himself surrounded by well-wishers, each wanting to shake his hand. That's when he heard it. Colonel Matheson, a young woman with a press badge, approached Ray. Jenna McCall, from the County Herald. Such a moving tribute to Sergeant Garner. Especially meaningful, given your connection to his last mission. Luke turned, catching Ray's sudden stillness. As the commanding officer who authorized that operation, the reporter continued, "Do you feel today's recognition helps address the civilian casualties that ended his career?" The world seemed to stop. Luke's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The chatter around him faded to a distant buzz as he stared at Ray, watching the color drain from the older man's face. That's not," Ray stammered, his eyes finding Luke's across the crowd. The truth hit Luke like a physical blow. All these weeks, all the conversations about that night, about the guilt he carried. Ray had known. He'd always known. The coffee cup slipped from Luke's fingers, hitting the grass with a soft thud. Eli looked up from his drawing, sensing the change in his father's posture. Ray took a step forward, reaching out. "Luke, I can't explain." But Luke was already moving, his back straight, his face hard as stone. He walked past the flags, past the well-wishers, past his son's confused expression. Each step carried him further from the man he'd begun to trust, like a father. The crowd's voices faded behind him as he walked away, leaving only the sound of flags snapping in the November wind. The clock on Luke's mantle ticked past midnight, each sound hammering like artillery fire in his head. He paced the worn carpet of his living room, moonlight casting long shadows through the windows. His hands trembled as he picked up the framed photographs from the shelf. Snapshots of memories that now felt poisoned. Eli's soft breathing drifted from down the hall, peaceful and unaware. Luke envied his son's innocent sleep. The boy had gone to bed proud of his father, clutching the little American flag from the ceremony. But now, in the dark hours, Luke's world had shattered. He stopped at his service photo, the one Ray had praised just weeks ago. The glass reflected his tired face, lined with fresh pain. Beside it sat his medals in their display case, honors that suddenly felt hollow. Each one reminded him of Ray's voice, his encouragement, his lies. "You knew," Luke whispered to the empty room. "All this time, you knew." The betrayal churned in his stomach. Every conversation, every shared coffee, every moment of supposed understanding, it had all been tainted by Ray's silence. The older man hadn't just known about the mission. He'd authorized it. He'd given the order that led to. Luke couldn't finish the thought. The image of that day in the desert flashed through his mind. The dust, the chaos, the terrible mistake. He'd carried that burden alone for years, or so he'd thought. But Ray had been there all along, watching him struggle, offering friendship while hiding the truth. He grabbed his keys from the counter, his movements sharp with anger. The babysitter from next door, Mrs. Peterson, arrived within minutes of his call, understanding in her eyes as she settled into the armchair near Eli's room. Luke couldn't wait until morning. This had to be faced now. The drive to Ray's house felt both too long and too short. Streetlights blurred past as Luke's mind raced through every interaction they'd shared over the past months. The veterans group, the shooting range, the barbecue. Had it all been Ray's attempt at redemption, or just his guilt seeking absolution? Ray's modest house sat dark, except for a single porch light. Luke's truck tires crunched on the gravel driveway as he pulled up. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. He forced himself to breathe, just like Ray had taught him years ago on the firing range. The irony made him sick. Luke strode up the walkway, each step fueled by years of buried pain. He pounded on the door, not caring about the late hour. After a moment, lights flickered on inside. Ray opened the door wearing old Marine sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, his gray hair disheveled. His eyes widened at the sight of Luke, understanding immediately washing over his weathered face. "You lied to me." Luke's voice came out low and dangerous. All these months, playing mentor, playing friend, it was all a lie. Ray stepped back, allowing Luke to enter. "Son, please let me explain. Don't call me son." Luke's shout echoed off the walls. He paced Ray's living room like a caged animal. "You knew exactly who I was at the DMV. You knew what happened that day. You signed the orders." "I did." Ray's voice cracked. "I've carried that decision every day since." "Carried it?" Luke spun to face him. "You gotta go home clean. You gotta retire with honors. I'm the one who had to pull the trigger. I'm the one who sees that child's face every night." Ray's shoulders slumped. He looked older than ever, his usual strength crumbling. "You're right. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. But when I saw you at the DMV, saw how you were with Eli," he swallowed hard, "I thought maybe God was giving me a chance to make things right." "Make things right?" Luke laughed bitterly. "By deceiving me? By pretending to understand my pain when you were partly responsible for it?" "The intel was bad," Ray's voice shook. "I never should have approved that mission without better confirmation. That's on me, Luke. All of it. And what about the past few months? Was any of it real? Or was I just your shot at redemption?" Tears welled in Ray's eyes. "Everything I told you about being proud of you, about admiring the father you've become, that was all true. I should have been honest about my role, but my care for you and Eli was never a lie." Luke moved toward the door, his anger giving way to a deep, aching betrayal. "You're just another officer who got to go home clean," he spat. "Keep your guilt. Keep your prayers. Just stay away from me and my son." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Inside, Ray's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his armchair. His chest heaved with sobs as he gripped the arms of the chair, his heart racing painfully. "Dear Lord," he whispered through his tears, "please forgive me. Please help him forgive me." But only silence answered as the night grew deeper, and Ray sat alone with the weight of his long-held secret finally exposed. The autumn chill crept through Garrison Street as another gray morning dawned. Luke's small house, usually bright with laughter and the smell of pancakes, stood quiet. Inside, dirty dishes filled the sink, and unopened mail scattered across the kitchen counter told the story of days passing in bitter silence. Luke moved through his morning routine like a shadow. He pulled on his work clothes, the familiar blue, coveralls feeling heavier than usual. His weathered hands fumbled with the buttons, his mind elsewhere, back in that churchyard, hearing those words that changed everything. "Daddy?" Eli's small voice came from the doorway. "Are we having breakfast today?" Luke looked up, seeing his son already dressed for school, backpack clutched tight against his chest like a shield. The sight stabbed at his heart. "Sorry, buddy. Got distracted." He managed a weak smile. "How about some cereal?" Eli nodded, but his usual morning bounce was gone. He slid into his chair at the kitchen table, watching his father's stiff movements. The boy's drawings, usually proudly displayed on the refrigerator, had slowly disappeared over the past few days, as if he too was retreating from the world. At work, Luke buried himself in engines and oil changes. His co-workers knew better than to ask about the veterans event or why Colonel Matheson hadn't stopped by lately. They just passed him tools in silence, respecting the invisible wall he'd built around himself. During lunch break, Luke sat alone in his truck, staring at his phone. 3 missed calls from Pastor Whitmore. 2 text messages from Ray. He deleted them all without reading. Across town, Ray Matheson's house had become equally silent. The usually active veteran hadn't shown up for his regular volunteer work at the church food bank. His truck stayed parked in the driveway, collecting leaves. Inside, Ray sat in his study, surrounded by old photographs and service medals. His normally neat appearance had slipped, his shirt was wrinkled, and several days' worth of stubble covered his chin. When his phone rang, he barely glanced at it. Pastor Whitmore again. This time, he answered. Ray. The pastor's gentle voice came through. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, David. Ray's voice sounded tired, stripped of its usual authority. I made my bed. Luke's hurting. You're hurting. This isn't what God wants for either of you. Ray rubbed his chest, wincing at the familiar tightness. I tried to visit him yesterday. He wouldn't even open the door. Give him time, Pastor Whitmore advised. But don't give up. After hanging up, Ray drove to the VA clinic for his scheduled appointment. The waiting room was busy with veterans of various ages, but he barely noticed them. Dr. Sanders called him in, frowning at the readings on his blood pressure monitor. Your numbers are concerning, Colonel, she said, reviewing his chart. The stress isn't helping your condition. Have you been taking your medication? Ray nodded absently, staring out the window at the flagpole in the parking lot. Colonel Matheson? Dr. Sanders leaned forward. Your heart condition is getting worse. We need to discuss treatment options. I just need to make one thing right, Ray said softly, more to himself than to her. That's all that matters now. Back home that evening, Ray sat at his desk, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. His hand trembled slightly as he began to write. Dear Luke and Eli, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There are things you need to know. Truth that should have been spoken long ago. He wrote steadily for an hour, pouring out everything. The full story of that mission, his years of guilt, his joy at finding Luke again, and his cowardice in not telling the truth sooner. He wrote about watching Eli grow over these past months, about seeing Luke heal, and about his own journey toward redemption. The letter grew longer, filled with apologies and explanations, hopes and regrets. When he finally finished, his chest ached and his eyes burned. He carefully folded the pages and slipped them into an envelope, writing, For Luke and Eli, in case I'm gone, on the front. Meanwhile, at Luke's house, Eli sat doing homework at the kitchen table. He looked up as his father walked past, wanting to ask about Ray but staying silent. Instead, he pulled out his sketchbook and began drawing. A picture of 3 people standing together. A tall man, a little boy, and an older man with gray hair. Luke caught a glimpse of the drawing as he passed. He paused, his throat tight, but said nothing. The silence in the house grew deeper as night fell, broken only by the sound of Eli's pencil scratching against paper and the distant rumble of thunder approaching from the west. Ray sealed the envelope with trembling fingers, then sat back in his chair. He touched the left side of his chest, feeling his heart's uneven rhythm. The medication bottles on his desk stood as silent witnesses to what he'd been trying to ignore. Outside his window, the first drops of rain began to fall, marking the start of what would become a long night for both men, one seeking forgiveness, the other struggling to give it. Sunday morning brought a gentle rain, the kind that whispered against windows and made the world feel small and quiet. Luke sat in his living room, armchair, coffee growing cold beside him, watching droplets trace patterns down the glass. Eli was sprawled on the carpet, coloring with the determined focus only children possess. The knock at the door startled them both. Pastor Whitmore stood on the porch, his gray hair damp from the rain, clutching a white envelope in his weathered hands. His usual warm smile was replaced by something more solemn. Luke, he said softly, may I come in? Luke hesitated, then stepped aside. The pastor's shoes squeaked against the hardwood floor as he entered, nodding hello to Eli, who waved shyly from his spot on the floor. Ray asked me to bring this to you, Pastor Whitmore said, holding out the envelope. He's been admitted to the VA hospital. His heart. The pastor's voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken worry. Luke stared at the envelope like it might burn him. His name was written across the front in Ray's precise handwriting, the kind that spoke of military discipline never forgotten. "He wanted you to have this," the pastor continued. "Whatever's inside, I think you need to read it." After Pastor Whitmore left, Luke sat back in his chair, turning the envelope over in his hands. Eli had abandoned his coloring and moved closer, sitting cross-legged at his father's feet. "What is it, Daddy?" "A letter from Colonel Matheson. Are you going to read it?" Luke's jaw tightened. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to hold on to the anger that had become familiar these past days. But something in his son's questioning eyes made him pause. With careful fingers, he broke the seal. The pages inside were filled with Ray's neat script, though Luke noticed places where the ink had blurred, as if drops of water, or tears, had fallen while writing. "Dear Luke," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll probably be in the hospital. The doctors say my heart isn't doing so well, but it's not my physical heart that hurts the most right now." Luke shifted in his chair, feeling something crack in his carefully maintained wall of anger. "I need to tell you the whole truth about that day in Kandahar. Yes, I approved the mission that changed your life. I've carried that decision like a stone in my chest ever since. When I saw you at the DMV that morning, it felt like God giving me a second chance. Not to make it right, because nothing can make it right, but to show you that you weren't alone in carrying that burden." The letter continued, Ray's words painting a picture Luke had never seen before. He described the impossible decisions of command, the weight of sending good men into danger, the nightmares that followed him home. "That mission haunts us both, son. While you were in position, I was coordinating with local civilians, trying to evacuate the area. We thought we had everyone out. We were wrong when that child appeared." Ray's writing grew shakier here. "I've relived that moment 1,000 times." Luke's hands trembled as he turned the page. Tucked inside was a photograph he'd never seen before, faded and creased at the corners. It showed Ray, younger but recognizable, shielding a group of civilians with his own body during what was clearly the same operation. The timestamp matched. "I didn't tell you because I was a coward," the letter continued. "I wanted to earn your trust first, to show you who I really was before you learned what I'd done. But in doing so, I betrayed that very trust. You deserved the truth from the beginning." Eli leaned against his father's knee, quiet but present, as Luke read on. "These past weeks with you and Eli have been a gift I didn't deserve. Watching you teach your boy, seeing how you've built a life of honor despite everything, it's helped heal something in my own heart. You're the son I never had, Luke. And Eli, that boy is pure light. When he handed me that juice box that first day at the shop, I felt like maybe God hadn't given up on me after all." Luke's vision blurred. He felt Eli's small hand slip into his. "I don't ask for forgiveness. That's not why I'm writing this. I just needed you to know that the friendship we shared was real. Every moment, every conversation, every time I looked at you and Eli and thought, this is what grace looks like." The final paragraph was shorter, the writing less steady. "I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the father you've become, the man you are. Whatever you decide after reading this, know that. And know that the ghosts we carry don't define us. Sometimes they just lead us to where we need to be." It was signed simply, Ray. Luke let the pages fall into his lap. His cheeks were wet, and he realized he was crying, really crying, for the first time since that day in the desert. All the anger, all the betrayal, seemed to wash away with those tears, leaving behind something that felt almost like peace. "Daddy?" Eli's voice was small but steady. He squeezed his father's hand. "Are you okay?" Luke looked down at his braid. "Son," seeing in those innocent eyes the same kind of grace Ray had written about. He pulled Eli close, breathing in the clean scent of his hair. "We're going to see him," Luke whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The rain continued outside, but somehow the world felt a little less gray, a little less cold. The letter lay open in Luke's lap. Ray's words bridge-building across the silence of the past days, reaching towards something that felt like forgiveness. The windshield wipers swept back and forth as Luke drove through the misty morning rain. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Ray's letter folded carefully in his jacket pocket. In the passenger seat, Eli sat quietly, his small fingers tracing patterns on the foggy window. "Is Colonel Ray going to be okay, Dad?" Eli's voice was soft, barely audible above the car's engine. Luke glanced at his son, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll see, buddy. That's why we're going to visit him." The VA hospital loomed ahead, a sprawling brick building with American flags hanging limp in the drizzle. Luke's throat tightened as he pulled into the parking lot. He'd been here before, visiting other veterans, but this time felt different. This time, the weight in his chest was almost unbearable. They walked through the automatic doors together, Eli's hand tucked securely in his. The hospital corridors stretched out before them, painted in muted blues and grays. The familiar smell of antiseptic mixed with coffee from the nurse's station made Luke's nose wrinkle. At the front desk, a nurse with kind eyes directed them to the third floor. The elevator ride felt endless, with only the soft hum of machinery and Eli's nervous shuffling breaking the silence. Luke found himself touching the letter in his pocket again, feeling the creases he'd made from reading it over and over. Room 317. The door was partially open, and Luke could hear the steady beeping of monitors inside. He hesitated, memories of their last encounter flooding back. His anger, the harsh words, Ray's devastated expression. Eli squeezed his hand, somehow sensing his father's uncertainty. "It's okay, Daddy," Eli whispered, showing wisdom beyond his 8 years. Luke took a deep breath and knocked softly on the doorframe. "Colonel?" he called out, his voice rougher than he intended. Ray lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller and frailer than Luke had ever seen him. His silver hair seemed whiter against the pale blue pillowcase, and various tubes and wires connected him to quietly humming machines. Despite his weakness, Ray's eyes opened immediately at Luke's voice. "Luke?" Ray's voice was barely above a whisper. "You came." Luke moved into the room, guiding Eli with him. The morning light filtered through the window blinds, casting gentle shadows across the floor. "I got your letter, sir." Ray's weathered face creased with emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd read it. I read it several times." Luke's voice cracked as he pulled up a chair beside the bed. Eli climbed onto another nearby, his eyes wide as he watched the two men. "I'm so sorry, Luke." Ray's hand trembled as he reached out. "I should have told you from the beginning. I saw you there at the DMV with your boy, and you looked so at peace. I thought maybe you could make it right without opening old wounds." Luke finished, taking Ray's outstretched hand. It felt cool and fragile in his grip. Tears welled in Ray's eyes. "I've carried that day with me every moment since, just like you have. When I saw you again, I thought God was giving me a chance to help heal what I'd broken." Luke felt his own eyes burning. "I was so angry when I found out. But your letter, that photo of you protecting those civilians, I realized we were both just trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. You were always the best shot, son," Ray whispered, his grip tightening slightly. "Not because of distance, but because of heart. You cared about every trigger pull, every life in your scope. That's what made you special." Eli slid off his chair and moved closer to the bed. "Colonel Ray?" His voice was small but clear. Ray turned his head slightly, a weak smile touching his lips. "Hey there, young man. Thank you for helping my dad," Eli said, reaching out to touch Ray's arm. "He smiles more now." Ray's eyes glistened. "Your daddy helped me too, Eli. More than he knows." Luke couldn't hold back his tears anymore. They fell silently, as he watched his son comfort the man who'd become like a father to them both. The morning light grew stronger, warming the room as they sat together. "Keep your hands steady, Eli," Ray murmured, his voice growing fainter. "Steady hands, steady heart." The words seemed to float in the air as Ray's breathing slowed. Luke held his breath, watching as the monitors beside the bed went still, their steady rhythm fading into silence. The old church bells chimed softly in the morning air as people filed into the white wooden chapel. American flags lined the walkway, gently swaying in the breeze. Luke adjusted his tie and squeezed Eli's shoulder as they walked up the steps together. The boy wore his Sunday best, a crisp blue shirt tucked into khaki pants that still had department store creases. Inside, framed photos of Ray throughout his military career decorated the altar. There he was, as a young lieutenant, stern-faced and proud. Another showed him training recruits at Camp Pendleton, and the most recent captured him at last week's Veterans Day ceremony. His weathered face creased in a gentle smile. The pastor nodded to Luke as he made his way to the front pew where other veterans sat in their dress uniforms. Eli slid in beside his father, his small hand finding Luke's larger one. The wooden pews gradually filled with familiar faces from town, mechanics from the shop, regulars from the diner, members of the Veterans Outreach Group. When it was time, Luke stood and walked to the podium. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded his prepared notes, but his voice remained steady. "Colonel Ray Matheson was more than just my former instructor," Luke began, his words echoing in the hushed sanctuary. "He was a man who taught me that true courage isn't about how far you can shoot, but how far you're willing to go to make things right." Luke paused, looking out at the gathered faces. Some nodded in understanding. Others dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "When I first met Ray again at the DMV, I was lost, though I didn't know it then. I was a single dad trying my best, carrying wounds that wouldn't heal." Luke's voice grew softer. Ray could have kept his distance. He could have let the past stay buried. Instead, he chose the harder path. He chose to face his regrets, to try to make amends. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden floor. Luke continued, "Ray showed me that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger. Sometimes it's about understanding that the person you're angry with is fighting the same battles you are." He glanced at Eli, who sat straight-backed and solemn. "He became a grandfather to my son, showing him what it means to have steady hands and a steady heart. He taught us both that healing doesn't come from running from your past. It comes from facing it with grace." Luke's voice grew thick with emotion. In his final letter to me, Ray wrote that his greatest honor wasn't any medal or commendation. It was being allowed to be part of our lives, to help mend what was broken. He carried the weight of difficult decisions made in war, just as I did. But he taught me that we don't have to carry those burdens alone. The chapel fell silent as Luke finished speaking. Only the soft whisper of wind through the open windows could be heard. "Semper Fidelis, Colonel," he said finally, touching 2 fingers to his brow in a subtle salute. "Always faithful until the end." After the service, a small procession of cars wound their way to the coast. The Marine Memorial stood atop a grassy bluff overlooking the ocean, its bronze figure eternally vigilant against the horizon. Below, waves crashed against the rocky shore, where Ray had once trained countless young Marines in the art of marksmanship. Luke carried the simple wooden box containing Ray's ashes, Eli walking solemnly beside him. Other mourners formed a loose circle, heads bowed in respect. The pastor spoke a final prayer as the salt breeze carried his words away. When the moment came, Luke opened the box with careful reverence. He and Eli stepped forward together, father and son united in this final duty. The wind was perfect, steady and true, just as Ray had taught them about shooting conditions so many years ago. "Ready, buddy?" Luke asked softly. Eli nodded, his small hands joining his father's on the box. Together, they released Ray's ashes into the wind. The gray particles caught the sunlight as they drifted out over the waves, becoming one with the sea and sky. The gathered veterans raised their hands in salute as a bugler played taps, its mournful notes floating across the water. Luke stood at attention, his own salute crisp and proper, tears running freely down his cheeks now. When the last note faded, most of the mourners began making their way back to their cars. Luke and Eli remained, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The waves below continued their endless rhythm against the shore, a sound Ray must have known well during his years of training young Marines. Eli stepped closer to the memorial's edge, his back straight and chin lifted just as Ray had shown him. His small hand rose in a perfect salute, one that would have made the old colonel proud. "Goodbye, Gramps," he whispered to the waves. Luke moved behind his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Together they stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as it descended toward the water. The same ocean that had witnessed countless young Marines learning to steady their hands now carried Ray's ashes in its eternal dance. Spring sunshine filtered through the budding trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Behind Luke Garner's modest home, nestled in a peaceful clearing, stood 3 wooden targets mounted on hay bales. The makeshift range wasn't fancy, just some recycled lumber and supplies from the hardware store. But it held meaning deeper than its simple appearance suggested. Luke watched as 8-year-old Eli carefully arranged his shooting mat on the ground, just as they'd practiced. The boy's tongue poked out slightly in concentration as he smoothed every wrinkle from the fabric, making sure it was perfect. It reminded Luke so much of himself at that age, determined, methodical, paying attention to every detail. "Remember what Ray taught us?" Luke asked softly, kneeling beside his son. Eli nodded, his eyes bright. "Steady hands, steady heart," he recited, then added with a small grin, "And don't forget to breathe, Dad." Luke chuckled, ruffling Eli's hair. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of early wildflowers. They'd built this range together over the past few months, spending weekends clearing brush and setting up targets. It wasn't about becoming a marksman or following in military footsteps. It was about something else entirely. "You know," Luke said, helping Eli adjust his safety glasses, "Colonel Ray used to say that shooting wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about learning to be still inside yourself." "Like during prayer time at church?" Eli asked, squinting thoughtfully. "Exactly like that, buddy," Luke smiled, remembering Ray's gentle wisdom. "It's about finding that quiet place in your mind where everything else falls away." They'd started with air rifles, nothing more powerful than what you'd find at a carnival shooting gallery. Luke had been nervous at first, worried that handling any kind of firearm might bring back the dark memories. But something different happened instead. Teaching Eli the basics Ray had once taught him felt like healing, like coming full circle. "Watch how the wind moves the leaves," Luke instructed, pointing to the trees. "See how they dance? That's your breathing pattern right there." Eli nodded seriously, settling into position. His small frame aligned perfectly with the training rifle, just as they'd practiced. Luke felt a surge of pride watching his son's natural focus. Not the intense concentration of a soldier, but the peaceful attention of someone learning to be present in the moment. "Tell me the steps," Luke prompted, sitting cross-legged beside him. "First, check if the range is clear," Eli recited carefully. "Then, get comfortable on the mat. Breathe in slow, just like the leaves." He demonstrated taking a deep breath. "Line up the sights and squeeze real gentle, like petting Mrs. Peterson's cat." Luke couldn't help but smile at the comparison. Ray would have loved that. He always said the best teachers found ways to make complex things simple. They spent the morning this way, father and son, taking turns with the rifle. Between shots, they shared stories about Ray, funny moments at the church barbecue, the time he tried to bake a pie and nearly set off the smoke alarm, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. "Remember when he helped us fix the truck?" Eli asked, carefully reloading. "He got grease all over his fancy church shirt." Luke laughed, the memory warm in his chest. "He sure did. Said it was worth it, though, just to see you smile when that engine finally started." The morning sun climbed higher, warming the spring air. Birds called from the trees, unafraid of the occasional soft pop from the air rifle. This place had become their sanctuary. Not a reminder of war, but a testament to peace. "Dad?" Eli looked up from the rifle, his expression serious. "Do you think Colonel Ray can see us now?" Luke paused, feeling the gentle breeze brush his face. "I believe he can, buddy. I really do." Eli nodded, satisfied, then turned back to his target. His breathing steadied, just as they'd practiced. Luke watched his son's small fingers curl around the grip, steady and sure. The shot broke the morning quiet, a gentle pop followed by the satisfying ping of pellet meeting target, dead center. Eli's face lit up with joy, but he maintained his position, just as he'd been taught. Safety first, always. "Did you see that, Dad?" he whispered excitedly, following proper range protocol by keeping his voice low. "I sure did." Luke's chest swelled with pride, not just at the accurate shot, but at the patience and discipline his son showed. That was perfect form, buddy. Ray would be proud. A warm breeze rustled through the trees, making the new spring leaves dance and whisper. For a moment, Luke could almost hear Ray's voice in that gentle sound. Steady hands, steady heart. Father and son stood together in the clearing, bathed in golden morning light. The target gleamed in the distance, its bullseye a testament to more than just marksmanship. It spoke of healing, of lessons passed down, of love that bridged generations. Luke looked at his son, seeing not just the boy he was, but the man he would become. Someone who understood that true strength came from patience, focus, and a gentle heart. Ray's legacy lived on, not in war stories or military records, but in these quiet moments of connection and growth. The sunlight streamed through the trees, turning the world to gold. In that moment, Luke felt a peace he hadn't known in years. A peace built on forgiveness, faith, and the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Luke Garner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.